one thing that I've always found amazing is in hip hop, at least in our era, the MCs have a habit of making amazing second albums. They'll put out an album to establish who they are and what sounds great, but then the second album comes out and it just seems to blow everyone's mind and redefine who they are and their pathway.
All right.
So we talked previously about Gangstar. When Step in the Arena came out, that sound defining the Gangstar sound and had a deep impact on all of East Coast hip hop. When you look at Pete Rock and CL Smooth, Mac and the Soul Brother is the second album.
Okay.
When They Reminisce Over You is the lead single, and suddenly Pete Rock is essentially the new Premier at this point. He becomes the new defining sound of hip hop. When you look at Cypress Hill, first album blew everybody's mind, just ripped the heads off of people. And then when they came out with Black Sunday, it was just like they took that brilliance and upgraded the level. They're like second album, remarkable. And you look at Fugees when you see The Score, second album. Tribe Called Quest, Low End Theory, second album. Big Daddy Kane, I love Long Live the Kane. That'll always be one of my favorite albums. But when you look at a brilliant album across the board, it's a Big Daddy thing, second album. And so that's something that I've always been like, this is a dope thing. It's like they come out, they make their first album, and then the next one is something that just sends these shockwaves through the industry.
All right. Well, my question to you, first of all, when you mentioned the Fugees, I was like, okay, I'm 100% with you on that, because what they did between their first and second album is just remarkable. But what about the idea of the Sophomore Jinx?
The Sophomore Jinx does happen. There are people that suffer from the Sophomore Jinx where their first album may not have been great, but they had a great single. And the Sophomore Jinx is what slaughters one-hit wonders.
Okay, I could see that, but I do have a couple of counters for you.
Give me an example.
All right. I'll start slow. Funk Dubious.
Oh, okay.
That first album was pretty amazing.
Yes, the first album was brilliant. That's true. And then I don't know what happened there, because Son Doobie, he's got the lyrics, he's got a sense of humor. The whole crew, the beats were tight. They were affiliated with Soul Assassins, which at the time could do no wrong. So that's true. That was very much a Sophomore Jinx. I can't defend that one. I don't know what happened there.
All right. The second group I'm thinking of, I even know what their excuse is. Das Effects. So their first album was phenomenal. And they never, in my opinion, never came close to reaching those heights again.
Right.
But a part of it was their style was so unique when they came out. But it was one of those weird things that people were actually biting off of and okay doing it.
Yeah, unapologetically biting them. Everybody had the stickity and wiggity after them.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was all over the place. Now, I'll tell you, I think the second part of what happened with them is what happened with the other second album that I don't like to look at for this thing, which is Redman. Redman's first album, the album was just insane. I love just how raw, sloppy, uncut it was. I have an MC who's about to explode, and I just turned the mic on and dropped some beats, and he went off. That's one of my favorite archetypes for an MC. The rhyme animal, as Chuck D used to say. I love that. Second album was so much more mellow and subdued. Songs were still dope, but there wasn't a time for some action. There wasn't, that level of thing on it quite as much.
So his second album was
There's a Dark Side. And I think the same thing happened to Redman and Das Effects, which is EPMD broke up.
Okay, but what's interesting about that is, if I remember right, Das went with PMD.
Yep.
Redman went with Eric Sermon.
Yep.
I was a PMD fan. But in the long run, clearly, if you're going to say one of them won that, Eric Sermon ended up reaching new heights, mostly because of his production style.
Right.
Redman was with him, though. So what happened there?
Well, Redman's second album outsold his first one tremendously. But just, in my opinion, critically, it did not make the same impact. His second album sold well, but the one right after it, Muddy Waters, was when people started saying that he was putting out brilliant music.
Yeah. Yeah. Although a lot of people will say his second album was their favorite.
Yeah.
I've heard plenty of people say that. Okay, wait. There is the group, the kings of second album, Sophomore Jinx, in my mind.
Oh, no.
Black Sheep.
I knew it. When you say group, I knew what you're going to say. I believe that Black Sheep, Drez and Mr. Long as the crew that we knew from A Wolf in Sheep's Clothing were no longer functioning as that crew when they made the second album. They were already doing some different things. It impacted their sound. For instance, with the first album, Drez and Long both said that they wrote, produced, and recorded that album while De La was making De La Soul Is Dead. So they were with a group who was in the process of making their brilliant second album. So the Prince Paul influence was there. The biting humor was there. The unconventional samples were there. The spin on all the subject matter. They were heavily influenced by what De La was doing at the time, which means they probably were around Tribe. They probably were around Jungle Brothers. They were definitely around Prince Paul. I think for the second album, just looking at the production credits, looking at what they did, looking at Without a Doubt, which was a Salaam Remi joint, right? When you have a producer MC duo and then your lead single is from an outside producer, you have already decided your sound is changing.
I have read enough about Black Sheep to understand that there was a lot of contention there as far as the production and changing the sounds or whatever. Ultimately, I would say that the changing of sounds did not help the group at all. But that whole second album, to me, sounds like a completely different group.
Yes.
And it wasn't like Mr. Long didn't produce any of it. He produced some of it.
Right.
So I just don't get what happened there. Because that first album, The Wolf in Sheep's Clothing, everybody knows the choice is yours. It to this day, it'll still end up in commercials. You
right.
Get with this, you get with that. But that whole album was phenomenal.
Yeah, start to finish, brilliant.
Yeah, and it hurts my heart. The second album, which was disappointing, and then nothing else from them.
Right. And that's what I was about to say. Think about, and this is going to sound odd, so you have to kind of ride it out with me. Think about OutKast.
All right.
OutKast's first album introduced this entirely new sound of hip hop. It was, we're going to take funk and soul and put a couple of pimps and players on it. And we're not gangsters, we're just players. And we're going to make some banging music. Lyrics were crazy, flows were crazy, music was crazy. No one had heard anything like it before. And they went up there on stage and said, the South got something to say. When you move into the second album, Organized Noise, who produced the entire first album, still produced some tracks on the second album. But Earth Tone 3, which is Big Boy, Dre, and Mr. DJ, started producing tracks as well. And that's where Elevators came from. Elevators is an entirely different sound from anything off of album 1.
Absolutely. Now,
it was successful and worked for them. But it can be argued that OutKast, even though the human beings are the same people, OutKast of ATLiens is an entirely different crew from OutKast of Southern Playlistic Cadillac Music. And then you see them just kind of hatch from there. And every album, they got deeper into their own sound, experimented more, and et cetera, and there was no turning back. What we would have expected from OutKast's second album is closer to some of what we got from Goody Mob's first album.
Yep. Same production team.
Exactly. For whatever internal, like I think what we're seeing with the music is the symptoms of a change or the ripples from the impact. I don't think it's actually the change. I don't think Drez and Long sat down and said, we're going to change our sound. I think something changed with Drez and Long and the sound was a result of it. I think the way we talked about with Redman and Das Effects, when Eric and Parrish are together making your tracks, you get hard street music that's going to bump on the radio. When you separate Eric and Parrish, one of them is giving you radio bangers and one of them is giving you underground street music. And so when you get to OutKast, the same thing. They got super experimental and didn't get pulled back into just this funk soul vibe. And they got it more into we're going to do our thing vibe. And they became the OutKast that people knew all the way up to Speaker Box Level Low.
Okay, well, you just mentioned how EPMD broke up and the sound changed. OutKast stayed together, but they went in different directions.
Yep.
And maybe it almost is the reverse of what you're saying with EPMD production style. Their separate directions, but staying together, gave a sound that covered more range.
Right. It would be like putting Eric and Parrish together if they didn't know each other before.
Okay, I'm with you.
And so suddenly you get the best of these two worlds. When we look at production on second albums like The Score, it's like a different group. When you look at Low End Theory, I love the laid back, fun-loving, we sampled frogs on a beat of Tribe's first album, People's Instinctive Travels in the Paths of Rhythm. But when you get to just the opening and you get that jazz riff of Excursions, doom, 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 and then they're sampling Last Poets across the chorus of it. time. Time is a ship on a shiftless sea, plague and plague. When you start looking at that first song told you something special is happening here, and it wasn't what was happening before, but it's definitely the same crew from the lyrics. They just upgraded the sound.
Second albums. All right. I'm with you. So Sophomore Jinx is a folklore legend?
I won't say it never happened. You brought up a couple of good cases.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
This is a 19 Media Group presentation.
Thank you, man. You want to say anything else? No, nothing? All right, thank you, sir.
Bye.
Appreciate you.